At the grand gala for my husband's company product launch, I had planned to reveal that I was the heiress to a multi-million-dollar fortune and announce our partnership to the world. But as I walked in, I heard him talking to his colleague. "She's so naive," he said. "She has no idea what's really going on." Then I saw them, tangled together on his office couch. "She's so naive. She has no idea what's really going on." Blake's voice seeped through the crack in his office door, stopping me dead in the hallway of Vance Innovations. I'd come to surprise him before the big event, dressed in the emerald green dress head, bought for our anniversary. In my hand, I clutched the note cards where I'd written my grand confession, that I was not just his supportive wife, but Claire Sterling, the heiress to Sterling Biopharma, who had been secretly bankrolling his dream. A moment later, the deep, intimate laugh of Sloane Donovan followed. "How much longer are you going to play house with her?" Through the narrow gap, I saw them on the leather couch, the same one I'd helped him pick out last spring. Her perfectly manicured fingers were tracing patterns on his chest while he toyed with a lock of her hair. They were both fully dressed, but their posture suggested this was not their first stolen moment. My knees buckled. I leaned against the wall, grateful for its cold support. The note cards crumpled in my hand as my fist clenched involuntarily. 6 years. 6 years of pretending to be an ordinary woman, hiding my legacy to be sure his love was real. "And this is my reward," Blake said, his hand sliding down Sloane's back. "Just until tonight's launch. Once the funding is secured, I can start the separation process. The prenup I had her sign protects everything I've built. Everything Head built with my money. With the anonymous investments I'd funneled through shell companies to save his failing startup 3 years ago, then 2, and again last spring when his mismanagement nearly drove the company into bankruptcy. The irony tasted like acid in my mouth. "What about her family?" Sloane asked. "Doesn't she come from some money?" Blake laughed, a sound that made my stomach churn. "Her grandmother left her some jewelry she keeps stashed in a kitchen drawer. Thinks I don't know about it. Probably worth $10,000, maybe $20,000. She plays the part of a freelance designer, but I've seen the way she looks at expensive things. Typical champagne taste on a beer budget. That's why I had to protect my assets with the prenup. The kitchen drawer, where I kept my Cartier watch, my Van Cleef & Arpels earrings, my father's Patek Philippe, items worth more than his company's entire quarterly revenue, hidden between mismatched spoons and expired coupons because I wanted him to love me, not the untouched $3.25 billion sterling fortune that had been sitting dormant since my father passed away 2 years ago. "You're terrible," Sloane said, but her tone made it clear she found it charming. "What time should I meet you at the gala?" "10:45. I'll introduce you to the board as our new director of R&D. A position Head told me was going to Mike from the Chicago office." My hand found the wall again, needing its stability. There was no Mike. I'd thought the name was odd when Blake mentioned him last week. I'd even offered to help put together a welcome packet. Blake had brushed me off, saying HR would handle it. "And your wife won't suspect a thing?" "Claire?" He said my name as if it were an unpleasantness. "She'll be too busy playing the part of the supportive wife. She loves it standing by my side, smiling for pictures, pretending she understands what we do here. I bought her that green dress specifically for tonight. She'll wear it, because she always does what I expect. The green dress, hanging in our closet. The one Head given me last month, saying it matched my eyes. I had been so touched by the gesture that Head remembered our anniversary even when he was so consumed with work. Now I understood it was just another prop in his performance. The phone in my purse vibrated. A text from Grace, my only friend who knew the truth about my inheritance. "Are you really going to tell him tonight? Please, think it over. Something doesn't feel right." If only she knew how right her instincts were. I heard movement in the office, the scrape of chairs. They were getting up. I forced myself to move. My heels echoed on the marble floor as I headed for the stairwell. No elevators, too much risk of running into them. 20 minutes earlier, I'd been in my car, practicing my speech. "Blake, I have something to tell you. I'm not who you think I am. My real name is Claire Sterling, and I've been backing your dreams because I believe in you. Because I love you." I'd imagined his face, the shock turning to elation as he realized we could build an empire together. Now those words tasted like poison. The stairwell door clicked shut behind me with a decisive thud. I stood there in the fluorescent light, in designer shoes I'd told Blake were knockoffs and which were already starting to pinch. My phone rang. Blake's face appeared on the screen, our wedding photo, where he was looking at me like I was his entire world. "Hey, beautiful," he said when I answered, his voice warm and affectionate. "Just wanted to make sure you're still on for tonight. You're wearing the green dress, right?" "Of course," I heard myself say, my voice surprisingly steady. "Perfect. I have a big surprise planned after the announcement, something that's going to change our lives forever." "I can't wait," I replied. And for the first time, I was telling the truth, just not in the way he expected. "Gotta run," he continued. "Still back to back with these investors. They're playing hardball, but after tonight, everything will be different. I promise." "Yes, Blake," I said softly. "Everything will be different." The call from Lawrence Pierce came 3 days later, as I was pretending to work on a logo design for a fictitious client. My laptop screen showed Adobe Illustrator, but my mind was still replaying Blake's words, Sloane's laugh, the cruelty of their conversation. When Lawrence's name flashed on my phone, I almost didn't answer. The Sterling estate lawyers only ever called when something was wrong. "Claire, we need you down here immediately," Lawrence said, forgoing any pleasantries. His voice carried the weight of 40 years practicing probate law. "There are documents that require your signature before closing today. Otherwise, we're looking at a 7-figure tax penalty from the IRS on your father's pharmaceutical patents." I glanced at the clock. 2 p.m. Blake wouldn't be home before midnight, as usual, but I still needed an excuse to leave. "How long will this take?" 2 hours, minimum. These are complex transfers involving European holdings. If we don't file by the end of the month, the IRS will assume you're forfeiting part of the inheritance. My inheritance. The $3.25 billion Blake thought was a few pieces of grandma's jewelry. The pharmaceutical empire, he had no idea, was funding his dream through carefully arranged, anonymous investments. Every time Vance Innovations was on the brink of collapse, a mysterious venture capital investor would appear with the exact amount they needed. Blake never questioned the coincidence. His ego wouldn't allow him to imagine someone was propping him up. "I'll be there in 40 minutes, I told Lawrence, already fabricating the lie I'd tell Blake if he asked. An urgent request from a demanding client. Another logo revision. The mundane fiction of my invented career. The law firm of Pierce & Partners occupied 3 floors in a building that screamed old money. Persian rugs worth more than most people's cars. Original paintings that belonged in museums. Lawrence received me in his office, the documents already spread across his mahogany desk. Each signature I made released another piece of my father's empire into my control. Pharmaceutical plants in Switzerland, research patents valued in the billions, investment portfolios that had been growing since before I was born. "Your father would be proud," Lawrence said as I signed for the 20th time. He always said, "You'd know when it was time to claim your legacy." Proud to see me hiding my wealth from my husband like a shameful secret, faking normalcy while Blake built his ego on the foundations of my hidden support. 2 hours later, I was walking through the lobby of Vance Innovations, having decided to surprise Blake with coffee from his favorite cafe, when I ran into Sloane Donovan. It wasn't an accident. She was clearly waiting, positioned perfectly to intercept anyone heading for the elevators. "Claire," she said, my name sounding like we were old friends, though I knew we'd never been formally introduced. Her hand gripped my arm, her fingers squeezing just enough to stop me from walking away. "So nice to finally meet you." Up close, she was everything I wasn't. Tall where I was average, blonde where I was brunette, radiating the kind of confidence that comes to women who have never had to question their place in the world. Her perfume hit me instantly. Something expensive and distinctive. Tom Ford's Black Orchid, maybe? The same scent that had clung to Blake's suit jacket last week when he claimed had been in back-to-back meetings. "I don't believe we've met," I said, though I knew exactly who she was. Sloane Donovan, director of R&D, the woman whose fingers had been tracing patterns on my husband's chest 3 days ago. "Oh, but I feel like I know you," she said, her smile showing a few too many teeth. "Blake talks about you all the time. How devoted you are. How supportive." She paused, her eyes scanning my outfit, a deliberately modest dress from Zara, the counterfeit designer bag I carried to maintain the cover. It must be so hard, having a husband who works such long hours. The sympathy in her voice was so false it could have been synthesized in a lab. She squeezed my arm again, and I got another wave of the perfume. Definitely black orchid. Definitely the same scent that had been on Blake's clothes. "Hess dedicated to his work," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. "Oh, yes. Very dedicated." Something flashed in her eyes, amusement, or maybe triumph. "We were in a meeting until 3 a.m. the other night. Strategic planning for the launch. Your husband has incredible stamina." The coffee in my hand suddenly felt heavy. 3 a.m. Head texted me at 11 p.m. saying he was on his way home. Another lie to add to the collection. "I have to go," I said, taking a step toward the elevator. "Of course." She released my arm but leaned in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "By the way, that's a lovely dress. Zara has been doing some really nice things lately." She was gone before I could reply, her heels clicking against the marble with the confidence of someone who had already won a game I didn't know I was playing. I stood there, holding the cooling coffee, wondering how she knew where I shopped. Had Blake told her, laughing about his wife's bargain hunting while they held their strategic planning sessions? The surprise got worse that evening. Blake's mother, Beatrice, arrived unannounced at 7 p.m., using the spare key Wed given her for emergencies. I was in the middle of setting the table with my grandmother's antique Wedgwood porcelain, a set worth over $37,000 that had told Blake I found at a flea market for $250. "Claire, darling," Beatrice said, though her tone suggested I was anything but. She air-kissed me twice while her eyes catalogued everything wrong with our apartment. I was in the neighborhood. She lived in Greenwich, Connecticut. Nothing in Midtown Manhattan was in the neighborhood. "Blake's not home yet," I said, though she already knew that. She never visited when her son was present to buffer her criticisms. "Perfect. We can have some girl talk." She settled herself in our living room like a queen holding court. "This place is looking rather dated, don't you think? Perhaps after the launch, you'll be able to afford a decorator." The apartment was immaculate. I'd spent a fortune making it look comfortably middle class, hiding anything that might betray my wealth. But to Beatrice, who knew nothing of my inheritance, we simply weren't good enough. "We're comfortable," I said, pouring her a glass of wine from a bottle I claimed was from Trader Joe's, but had actually cost $375. "Comfortable," she repeated, the word tasting foul in her mouth. "Well, I suppose that's something. Although at your age, I had already given Blake's father 3 children. Blake isn't getting any younger, you know." We had the baby conversation every time she visited. She didn't know Blake had been putting it off for 2 years, always claiming we needed to be more financially stable first. Now I wondered if he was just waiting until he could leave me for Sloane. "Speaking of suitable matches," Beatrice continued, swirling the wine in her glass, "I ran into Sloane Donovan at the club yesterday. Such a wonderful background. Her father is in pharmaceuticals. You know, old money. The kind of circle that would be a perfect complement to Blake's ambitions." The wineglass trembled in my hand. "She seems nice." "Nice." Beatrice laughed. "Darling, she's exceptionnelle. Harvard Medical, a published researcher. The kind of woman who understands Blake's work." Her eyes settled on me with surgical precision. "Not that you don't try, dear, but some things just require a certain level of sophistication." I served dinner on my grandmother's porcelain while Beatrice continued her monologue about the virtues of Sloane Donovan. Every plate I set down was worth more than Beatrice's monthly mortgage payment. But she only saw what I wanted her to see, the mismatched plates of a middle-class wife playing house in a world where she didn't belong. After she left, as I was cleaning the kitchen, I found it, Blake's gym bag, forgotten in the corner behind the trash can. Inside, under his workout clothes, was the receipt that made my heart stop. Gurnis Montauk, 2 nights. King Suite. The dates matched the weekend he was supposedly working around the clock at the lab. Room service charges for breakfast for 2. Champagne delivered at midnight. When Blake finally got home at 11 p.m., I was still holding the receipt. "How was the Hamptons?" I asked. He didn't even pause as he hung up his coat. "What are you talking about? I haven't been to the Hamptons in months." I stood there, holding the receipt as Blake hung up his coat, his lie about the Hamptons hanging in the air between us like a physical presence. My hands weren't shaking anymore. They were past that stage, into a strange numbness that spread up my arms and into my chest. He walked past me into the bedroom, loosening his tie, completely oblivious that I was holding the proof of his betrayal in my hands. The next morning, I called in sick from my fictional design work and did something I had never done before. I followed my husband. He left at 8:30 a.m. Normal time, normal routine. He kissed my cheek with lips that had probably kissed Sloane's in that Montauk hotel room. He told me not to wait up because Tuesday meetings always ran late. Tuesday, I noted mentally. At noon, I was settled in a cafe across the street from Per Se, the luxury restaurant where Blake claimed he could never get a reservation. Through the window, I saw him arrive first, checking his watch, running a hand through his hair. He had changed his shirt since the morning. The blue one I'd bought him for Christmas was replaced by a gray one Sloane had complimented at a company dinner last month. She arrived 10 minutes later, and the way his face lit up sent a pang through my chest. He stood to greet her, his hand resting on the small of her back as he guided her to their table, an intimate, semi-hidden booth in the corner. The waiter brought champagne without being asked. This was clearly their spot, their Tuesday routine. Her hand slid across the table, her fingers lacing with his as they looked over menus they probably knew by heart. She threw her head back, laughing at something he said, and he watched her with an expression I recognized. It was the same way he used to look at me when we were dating, when I was still mysterious and exciting, before I became a piece of furniture in his carefully constructed life. When they left at 2:30 p.m., Blake helped her into her coat with a tenderness that made me have to look away. His hands lingered on her shoulders, fixing her collar, tucking a stray piece of hair behind her ear. The same gestures he once reserved for me, now performed on a sidewalk in broad daylight where anyone could see. Where his wife could see. Instead of going home, I drove to Grace's apartment. One look at my face was all it took for her to pull me inside, already reaching for the wine. We sat on her couch, the same one where Shed helped me practice my gala speech just 2 weeks ago, back when I thought my biggest problem was finding the perfect moment for my big reveal. "I have to tell you something," Grace said suddenly, wringing her hands in her lap. "I've been trying to find a way to tell you for weeks." The wine in my glass sloshed dangerously as I set it down. "What?" 3 weeks ago, I was downtown, looking for a birthday present for my mom. She was crying now, tears streaming down her face. I was walking past the Cartier boutique, and I saw Blake through the window. He was with some blonde woman. She was trying on rings. Claire, they were engagement rings. The room tilted slightly. I grabbed a throw pillow from the couch to steady myself. "Sloane. You know her? She works at Vance Innovations. She's the director of R&D. The words came out mechanically, as if I were reading from a company directory. Harvard Medical. Old money. Good background. As Blake's mother would say. Grace grabbed my hands, hers trembling. He was buying her a ring, Claire. The salesperson was bringing out different settings. She was posing with each one, taking selfies. They looked so happy. I wanted to go in there and scream at him, but I just froze. I've been living with this guilt for 3 weeks. I'm so sorry. An engagement ring, while he was still my husband. Still coming home to our bed, eating the dinners I cooked, playing the part of the devoted husband at company functions. The audacity of it was breathtaking. When was this? I asked, my mind racing through dates. 3 Tuesdays ago. Around 2 p.m. Tuesday. Their standing date. Lunch at Percy. Then ring shopping. How romantic. How perfectly planned. I wondered if he had proposed already. If she wore the ring somewhere I couldn't see it. Or if he was waiting until after the launch, after the funding was secured, and he could get rid of me without risking his company. That night, I waited until Blake was deeply asleep, his breathing even and heavy. His phone was charging on the nightstand, but I didn't need it. I had something better, access to our joint accounts, which he didn't know I monitored through my own banking app. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop, dimming the screen, and started to dig. There were small transfers every week, $500 here, $750 there, always to the same account number I didn't recognize. The transfers had been going on for over a year, labeled as investment planning or portfolio diversification. He had systematically moved over $50,000 from our joint savings. But I knew these patterns. I managed hundreds of millions in the Sterling Fund. I had seen every financial maneuver possible. This wasn't investment planning, it was an exit strategy. He was building himself a financial cushion, likely in an account under his name only, preparing for the divorce he thought was coming after the launch. The irony almost made me laugh. He was stealing what he thought was his own money, not knowing that every penny in our accounts had come from my inheritance, carefully laundered through fake freelance projects and imaginary clients. He was embezzling from the Sterling Empire without even knowing it existed. At 3 a.m., a phone vibrated. Not his usual phone, but a buzz coming from the pocket of his suit jacket. A burner phone, like a character in a bad spy movie. He got out of bed, took the jacket, and shut himself in the bathroom. But our apartment had thin walls, and I had learned years ago that if you press your ear to the wall, you can hear everything. "The timeline is tight," he was whispering. "The launch is Thursday. I need 2 more days to get everything locked down." A pause as someone replied, "No, she doesn't suspect a thing. Claire is too trusting. In fact, she actually bought the story about Mike from the Chicago office." A low chuckle. "I know. She even offered to help make him a welcome packet. Sometimes I almost feel guilty about how easy this is." Another pause. "The divorce papers are already drafted. My lawyer says with the prenup, she gets nothing but what she came into the marriage with, which is basically some old jewelry and whatever she's saved from her design gigs." My design gigs, which had funneled over $3.2 million into Vance Innovations over the past 6 years. After the launch, once the investors sign, I'll tell her Friday morning. I want to do it in person. At least I'll give her that respect. Respect. The word made me feel sick. "I love you too," he whispered. And my heart finally, definitively, broke. Just 2 more days, and we can stop hiding. The bathroom door opened. I forced my breathing to stay deep, and even as he slid back into bed beside me, this stranger with my husband's face. Within minutes, he was asleep again. But I was wide awake, staring at the ceiling, planning a timeline of my own. It was 36 hours until the Thursday launch. Blake thought he had 2 more days of deception left. He was wrong. The 36 hours passed with an excruciating slowness. I moved through Wednesday like an actor who had forgotten her lines, but kept playing the part anyway. Blake left that morning with his usual peck on the cheek, reminding me about the launch, making sure I would wear the green dress. I smiled and nodded, playing the role of the devoted wife one last time while my insides twisted with the knowledge of what was to come. Thursday arrived, bringing with it a humidity that made the air feel thick and oppressive. I spent the afternoon in Lawrence Pierce's office, signing the documents that would freeze certain anonymous investments, specifically the ones flowing into Vance Innovations. Lawrence didn't question my sudden decision. Had been my father's lawyer for 30 years and understood that sometimes timing is everything, in business as in personal affairs. At 6 p.m., I stood in front of the mirror in our bedroom, zipping up the emerald dress Blake had chosen for me. The fabric felt like armor against my skin. My hands were steady as I applied my lipstick, a shade darker than I usually wore. In my purse, the original note cards for my speech lay next to the new set I had prepared that morning. 2 versions of the same confession, but with very different endings. The drive to Vance Innovations took 20 minutes in Manhattan traffic. I used the time to breathe, to center myself, to morph from the woman who had spent 6 years hiding her true self into the one who was about to reveal everything. The glass facade of the building reflected the setting sun, tinting everything gold in a way that felt vaguely ominous. I parked in the guest section, not in my usual spot next to Blake's BMW. Tonight, I wasn't really his wife. I was someone else entirely. The elevator ride to the 40th floor had never felt so long. With each passing floor, I felt like I was shedding another layer of the character I had been playing for so long. The designer, the freelancer, the supportive wife, the naive woman who didn't understand her husband's business. By the time the doors opened, I felt stripped bare, exposed, and powerful in a way I had never experienced. The executive floor was buzzing with pre-party energy. Caterers were setting up elaborate displays. Bartenders polished glasses that would soon hold champagne that cost more per bottle than most people's car payments. But I wasn't heading to the ballroom just yet. I had one more thing to confirm, one more piece of evidence to gather before I could proceed with what I had planned. The door to Blake's office was slightly ajar, a sliver of golden light spilling into the hallway. I approached silently, my heels soundless on the thick carpet. Through the crack, I heard his voice, the casual, dismissive tone I now knew all too well. "She'll be here any minute," he was saying, playing the part of the perfect wife in that green dress I bought her. God, she was so grateful for that rag. You'd think I'd given her diamonds, not something from a Zara sale rack. Sloane's laugh was like nails on a chalkboard. "She really has no idea about us, does she? Claire is sweet, but observant is not her strong suit. Still thinks I'm working late when I'm with you. Still believes that conference in the Hamptons was real. I could probably bring you back to our apartment and she'd think you were the new cleaning lady." They were on the leather couch, the same one as before. Sloane had kicked off her shoes, her feet tucked under her as she leaned against Blake's shoulder. On her left hand, catching the light from his desk lamp, was the ring. The engagement ring Grace had seen. She was already wearing it, just on the wrong hand for now. "After I have the divorce talk tomorrow, we won't have to hide anymore," Blake continued, his fingers toying with her hair. "I've got it all set up. The prenup protects all my assets. She'll walk away with what she came in with, which is basically nothing. A little of her grandmother's jewelry, maybe the 50 grand she's saved from her design work." "And the company?" Sloane asked. "Once tonight's launch is a success, and the investors sign Vance Innovations, will be valued at over $100 million. Not a penny of which she can touch, thanks to that prenup. She was so eager to prove she wasn't after my money, she signed it without even having a lawyer look at it." And the irony of that statement nearly made me laugh out loud. The prenup protected his assets, yes, but it also protected mine. Every anonymous investment, every shell company transfer, every cent of the sterling fortune remained solely under my control. He had been so focused on protecting himself from a gold-digging wife that he never considered that he was the gold digger. I backed away from the door and walked to the executive floor bathroom, the one with marble countertops and individual stalls that locked properly. I stood at the sink, meeting my own eyes in the mirror. The woman looking back at me was not the one who had practiced speeches about love and partnership. This woman had sharper edges, a clearer gaze, and a plan that was about to unfold. I called Lawrence from the bathroom, my voice quiet but firm. "Execute the transfers we discussed. All of them. Immediately. Are you sure? Once I do this, there's no going back. I'm sûr." Next, I called the private security firm I had contacted earlier in the week. "Mercury Security. This is Claire Sterling. I need your team at Vance Innovations in 1 hour. Discreet positioning, but visible on my signal. Understood, miss?" "Sterling. Well, have 6 agents on site." I reapplied my lipstick, gave the emerald dress one last adjustment, and headed for the ballroom. The transformation was complete. I was not entering as Blake Vance's naive wife. I was entering as Claire Sterling, heiress to a pharmaceutical empire, and I was about to reclaim my power in the most public way imaginable. The doors to the ballroom were open, revealing a sea of New York's tech elite mingled with the city's old money. Investors, board members, journalists, and influencers were all here to celebrate the triumph of Vance Innovations. Heads turned as I entered. Many recognized me as Blake's wife, offering warm smiles and congratulations. Robert Klein, a board member, immediately approached, his wife Mary on his arm. "Claire, you must be so proud," Robert said, shaking my hand. "Blake has built something truly remarkable." "Yes," I agreed, my smile perfectly calibrated. "Tonight will certainly be remarkable." Mary leaned in conspiratorially. "Hez lucky to have such a supportive partner. Behind every great man, right?" "Sometimes," I replied, taking a glass of champagne from a passing waiter, "the woman isn't behind him at all. Sometimes she's been in front of him the whole time, and he just didn't notice." They laughed, taking it as a joke. If only they knew how literally I meant it. I circulated, accepting accolades and praise for Blake's success. Each compliment was like fuel to the fire burning in my chest. Several people mentioned how lucky Blake was to have me, how my support must have meant everything in the difficult early years. More than you could possibly imagine, I told each of them, my smile growing wider with every passing minute. The champagne flute felt weightless in my hand as I watched the crowd move and swirl around the room like a school of expensive fish. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, New York City glittered below us, oblivious that 40 stories up, a marriage and a company were about to implode in front of 300 witnesses. The lights dimmed slightly, and Blake appeared at the podium. His confidence radiated across the room. He looked every bit the CEO in his custom Tom Ford suit, the one I'd bought him last year with sterling money he didn't know existed. Behind him, the Vance Innovations logo was projected onto a massive screen, sleek and modern, built on a foundation of lies and the anonymous investments of a wife he considered a nobody. "Ladies and gentlemen," Blake began, his voice carrying that practiced warmth he used in investor meetings. "Tonight is the culmination of 6 years of innovation, dedication, and cutting-edge science. Vance Innovations is poised to revolutionize gene therapy, and we couldn't have done it without every single one of you." The crowd applauded politely. I noticed Sloane had positioned herself near the stage, close enough to be seen but not so close as to seem presumptuous. She had changed since the afternoon. She was now wearing a black cocktail dress that probably cost more than her supposed monthly salary. The engagement ring was gone from her right hand, likely tucked into her purse for the appropriate moment. Blake continued his speech, rattling off projections and market potential, using words like synergy and paradigm shift that made investors reach for their checkbooks. He was good at this, I had to admit. The performance, the commanding presence, the ability to make people believe in his vision. He just didn't realize his entire vision had been bankrolled by the woman head called naive 4 hours ago. "Before we move to the technical presentation," Blake said, his smile widening, "I want to take a moment to thank someone very special. My wife, Claire, who has been my rock through this entire journey. Darling, would you come up here?" The crowd turned toward me, applauding warmly. This wasn't part of the script, not the one I had prepared, anyway, but Blake loved his grand gestures, the public displays that made him look like a devoted husband. I set down my champagne and moved toward the stage, my heels clicking against the marble floor with metronomic precision. Each step felt like a march toward my own execution and resurrection. All at once, Blake extended a hand to help me up the 3 steps to the stage. His hand was dry and warm, the hand of someone completely certain of his control over the situation. He pulled me close, kissing my cheek for the cameras that were already flashing. "Isn't she wonderful?" he said into the microphone, his arm possessively around my waist. 6 years of supporting my dream, never complaining about the late nights or the endless meetings. I could not have done this without her. The irony of that statement almost made me laugh. He literally could not have done this without me. Just not in the way he was implying. The crowd applauded again, and I saw a few of the board members' wives dabbing their eyes, moved by this display of marital devotion. "Actually," I said, my voice ringing out across the hall before Blake could continue, "I have something I'd like to share too." Blake's arm tightened around my waist, but his smile didn't waver. "Of course, darling," he said, though I could see a flash of irritation in his eyes. This was not planned. I was not supposed to speak. I gently extricated myself from his grasp and took the microphone. Its weight felt right in my hands, like a weapon I had been waiting to wield. The room fell silent. Hundreds of faces turned toward the stage, expectant and curious. "Thank you all for coming tonight," I began, my voice steadier than the beat of my own heart. "This is indeed a momentous occasion, and am honored to be a part of it. Blake is right that I have been supporting his dream for 6 years. What he doesn't know is just how extensive that support has been." A ripple of confusion went through the crowd. Blake's hand touched my elbow, a warning disguised as affection. "You see," I continued, moving away from him, "Blake has had an anonymous investor for the last 6 years. Someone who believed in his vision enough to pour millions into it when the banks wouldn't lend him a dime. Someone who saved Vance Innovations from bankruptcy not once, not twice, but 3 times. The confusion in the room was turning to interest. Phones were coming out. sensing something newsworthy was happening. Blake's face had gone very still, the kind of stillness that precedes either flight or fight. "That investor," I said, looking directly at Blake, "was me. Claire Sterling, the sole heir to Sterling Biopharma and the woman you called naive this afternoon while you were cuddling with Sloane Donovan on your office couch." The gasp that went through the room was almost physical, like 300 people had inhaled at once. Blake's mouth opened, closed, and opened again, like a fish suddenly pulled from water. His hand shot out to grab the microphone, but I stepped back, holding it out of his reach. "This is ridiculous," he managed to say, his voice audible even without amplification. "Claire, what are you doing?" I took out my phone, connecting it to the presentation system with a single button. Lawrence Pierce had arranged for the technical capability yesterday, ensuring I could project whatever I needed. On the massive screen behind us, the first document appeared, bank statements showing the wire transfers from Sterling Holdings to Vance Innovations, dated and documented. Millions of dollars flowing from my inheritance into Blake's company. "Every major funding round," I said, my voice growing louder with each word. "Every emergency cash injection, every bridge loan that kept this company alive came from Sterling money. My money. Money Blake didn't know I had, because I wanted to be sure he loved me for who I was, not for my legacy." The screen changed to show a photograph Lawrence had provided. Me and my father at a Sterling Biopharma board meeting 5 years ago, clearly identified as his daughter and heir. Then another document, shell company paperwork, showing how the investments had been structured to remain anonymous. Sloane had started to edge toward the exit. The Mercury security personnel were already in position. Their subtle presence was effective. She stopped, trapped between the crowd and the security team, her face pale in the ballroom light. "But that's not even the best part," I continued, feeling the power of the moment coursing through me. "This afternoon, while preparing for tonight's event, I uncovered some interesting financial irregularities. It seems someone has been moving money from Vance Innovations' operational accounts into personal accounts. Someone has been billing personal expenses as company costs. Someone has been committing what I believe the FBI would call embezzlement and wire fraud." The screen filled with the proof I had gathered over the past 3 days: falsified invoices, questionable transfers, the hotel bill from the Hamptons charged to the company as a conference expense when no conference had taken place. Blake's face had gone from pale to gray. His hands were gripping the podium as if it could keep him from drowning. "Security!" Someone in the crowd yelled. "Someone call security!" But the security team was mine, and they weren't moving, except to control the exits. The crowd had become a living organism. Phones held high, recording everything. The silence replaced by frantic whispers, and the rapid-fire click of photos being taken. "I have already turned this information over to the proper authorities," I announced, looking directly at the crowd of investors and board members. "I imagine they will have some questions about where their money really went." The elevator descended in silence while, behind me, the ballroom exploded into chaos. Through the closing doors, I had a final glimpse of the board members surrounding Blake, their faces contorted with rage, while reporters pushed forward with microphones and cameras. The Mercury security team held their positions, ensuring order but not shielding Blake from the consequences that had finally caught up to him. My phone started vibrating before I even reached the parking garage. Blake's name flashed on the screen, call after call, which I let go to voicemail. Then came the texts, rapid-fire and increasingly desperate. "What did you do? We need to talk. This is insane. You don't understand what you just destroyed. Pick up the phone." I silenced the device and slipped it into my purse as I walked to my car. The valet, a young man who had always been kind to me, handed me my keys with wide eyes. He had clearly heard what happened upstairs. News traveled fast in buildings like this, especially when it involved public humiliation and federal crimes. The drive to our apartment took 15 minutes in the unusually light traffic. I used the time to call Lawrence Pierce, who answered on the first ring despite it being nearly 10 p.m. "I watched the live stream," he said. "All business." A few of the reporters were streaming. "You handled yourself exceptionally well. I need the divorce papers filed first thing in the morning," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "And you need to freeze all joint assets immediately." "Already done." I took the liberty of preparing everything after our meeting yesterday. The prenup Blake insisted on is actually very favorable to you, as it protects all premarital assets and inheritances. He essentially signed away any claim to the sterling fortune without knowing it existed. The irony was not lost on me. Blake had been so worried about protecting his future earnings from a gold-digging wife that had waived all rights to my billions. His lawyer had probably congratulated him on his foresight. I arrived at the apartment to find the locks had already been changed. The building management moved fast when Lawrence Pierce called. My new keys worked perfectly, and I let myself into what had been our home but now felt like a crime scene I needed to process and evacuate. My phone continued its relentless buzzing. Blake's messages had evolved from anger to negotiation. We can fix this. Think about what you're throwing away. 6 years. Sloane meant nothing. I made mistakes, but we can fix this. Please, just talk to me. I moved through the apartment methodically, taking only what was mine before Blake entered my life. My grandmother's, Wedgwood porcelain, carefully wrapped in tissue paper, childhood photo albums Id kept hidden in a closet. The jewelry ID kept stashed in the kitchen drawer, including the Cartier watch and the Van Cleef & Arpels pieces that were worth more than Blake's car. Everything else the furniture Wed picked out together, the art Wed bought on our honeymoon, the expensive gifts Had given me over the years I left. They were props from a play I was no longer in. Grace arrived at midnight with boxes and a fierce loyalty. One look at my face, and she pulled me into a hug that nearly broke my composure. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. "What you did tonight was incredible." "I feel numb," I admitted, continuing to pack while she helped. "I thought I would feel satisfaction, or anger or something, but I just feel empty." "It's shock," she said, wrapping another piece of the dinner service. "The emotions will come later. Right now, we just need to get you out of here." Blake's texts changed again. This time, to threats. "You destroyed everything I worked for. The FBI is seizing our accounts because of your circus act. My lawyers will destroy you. You think you've won? This isn't over. Nobody humiliates me like this." I showed them to Grace, who immediately forwarded them to Lawrence. Proof of harassment would be useful if Blake decided to escalate beyond angry texts, though considering investigators were likely already building a case against him, he had bigger problems than our divorce. By 2 a.m., my things were loaded into Grace's SUV and a small moving van. The apartment looked strange with my presence erased from it, like a set after a play has ended. I left my keys on the granite countertop, along with the wedding ring I had taken off in the elevator. No note, no explanation. The empty space where I had existed would say everything that needed to be said. The drive to the Hamptons took 3 hours on empty highways. The estate was something I had inherited when my father died, but I had never lived there, maintaining it through a management company while I played at being middle class in the city. As we drove through the gates, motion sensors triggered subtle lighting that illuminated a house I had only visited 3 times since the funeral. 20 rooms of immaculate solitude stretched out before us. The main hall alone was larger than most apartments, with a chandelier that had supposedly belonged to some 19th-century railroad tycoon. Grace let out a low whistle as we carried boxes through rooms where our footsteps echoed. "This is insane," she said, setting down a box in what was to be my bedroom. "You own all this, and you were living in that apartment, pretending to be normal." I wanted to be loved for who I was, not what I had, I said. The words sounded hollow now. Look how well that turned out. We found champagne in the cellar, vintage bottles worth thousands, and drank it out of paper cups Wed bought at a gas station. The contrast felt appropriate somehow. Sitting in a $10 million mansion, drinking champagne out of convenience store cups, while my marriage imploded on every media platform in the country. Lawrence called at 4 a.m. Federal agents raided Vance Innovations an hour ago. They're securing all computers and financial records. They've taken Blake in for questioning. Sloane Donovan, too. I sat up straighter in the leather armchair in my father's study, the one Head had imported from England decades ago. Your documentation was very thorough. Combined with what they're finding on the computers, they have enough for arrest warrants by morning. On top of that, 3 of the major investors have already filed civil suits against Blake personally. The prenup won't protect him from that. After Lawrence hung up, I turned on the television in my father's study. Every business channel was running the story. Someone had edited together clips from the live-streamed confrontation, my voice, clear and damning as I revealed both my identity and Blake's betrayal. The headline at the bottom of the screen read, "Sterling heiress exposes husband's fraud at his own company launch." An analyst was already speculating on what this meant for Vance Innovations. Without the Sterling funding, which apparently accounted for 70% of their capital, the company is essentially worthless. Add in the fraud charges and the investigation, and you're looking at a total collapse at market open. Grace found me there, as the dawn was painting the ocean visible from the study window. She brought coffee, in real mugs this time, and we sat together, watching my old life get dissected by strangers on television. "How are you feeling?" she asked gently. I considered the question. In the span of 12 hours, I had gone from being Blake's naive wife to exposing myself as a billionaire who had just publicly destroyed her husband's company. My phone showed hundreds of messages from numbers I didn't recognize, journalists, probably, or people who suddenly remembered we'd been friends in college. "Free," I said finally, and I meant it. The word free had barely left my lips when Grace's phone buzzed with a notification. She held it up, showing a video of Blake being led out of Vance Innovations in handcuffs, federal agents on either side of him. His face, caught in the harsh morning light, looked hollow and defeated, nothing like the confident man who had stood at a podium 12 hours earlier promising to revolutionize gene therapy. The footage was on a loop across all the business channels. Blake stumbling slightly on a curb, an agent's firm hand on his elbow, the way they carefully guided his head into the vehicle, protecting him from hitting the doorframe, even as they arrested him for crimes that could put him in prison for a decade. Before another team escorted Sloane Donovan out, her perfect posture finally broken, mascara running down her cheeks as photographers documented every moment of her downfall. Lawrence called a few minutes after the footage aired. "The FBI is expanding the investigation. They found evidence of additional fraud going back 3 years. Apparently, Miss Donovan was selling patented research to a competitor while billing Vance Innovations for consulting services that never took place. She's looking at charges of conspiracy, industrial espionage, and wire fraud." I went to the window of my father's study, looking out at the Atlantic Ocean as it stretched endlessly before me. The Hamptons estate had views that could make you forget the rest of the world existed, but I couldn't escape the reality of what was happening 100 miles away in the city. My phone showed 73 missed calls from Blake, 20 from unknown numbers, and 1 from Beatrice, Blake's mother. I almost answered that one, but then thought better of it. She could wait. The bankruptcy proceedings moved with astonishing speed. By the following Tuesday, less than a week after the launch, Vance Innovations filed for Chapter 7 liquidation. The investors who had been threatening civil suits froze what few assets remained, and without the sterling funding that had been keeping it afloat, the company collapsed like a house of cards. Lawrence arranged for Sterling Biopharma to put in a bid for the patents and research assets. It was a formality, really, as no other company wanted to touch anything associated with the scandal. "We're offering $10 million for the entire patent portfolio," Lawrence informed me during a meeting in the estate's formal dining room, papers spread across a table that seated 20. "The research is quite valuable, if managed properly. The scientists did good work, despite the failures of management. Make sure the research team knows they'll have jobs if they want them," I said, signing the acquisition papers. "They didn't create this mess. They shouldn't have to suffer for Blake's crimes." The auction itself took place in a sterile conference room in Manhattan. I didn't attend, but one of Lawrence's associates sent updates. Blake's executive team watched as their life's work was dismembered and sold for pennies on the dollar. The legitimate assets went to Sterling Biopharma. The office furniture and equipment went to liquidators. The expensive furnishings from the executive floor, including Blake's prized awards and diplomas, sold for less than $1,250 in total. Beatrice finally tracked me down on day 8, after I ignored 6 voicemails that had devolved from demanding to desperate. She showed up unannounced at the estate gates, forcing me to decide whether to let her in or leave her there like a door-to-door salesperson. Against my better judgment, I had security escort her to the main entrance. The woman who walked into my father's study bore little resemblance to the Beatrice who had criticized my housekeeping and questioned my worthiness as her son's wife. Her hair, usually perfectly coiffed, hung limp. Her designer clothes looked like she had slept in them, and her eyes had the desperation of people who have lost everything they thought was important. "Please," she said before I could speak, collapsing into a chair across from my desk without being invited. "You have to help him. You have to tell the DA, this is all a misunderstanding." "There is no misunderstanding, Beatrice. Your son embezzled funds, committed fraud, and destroyed the lives of hundreds of employees who trusted him. He made mistakes," she said, tears now flowing freely, ruining what makeup she had probably spent an hour applying. "But he doesn't deserve to lose everything. Has my only son, Claire. Surely you understand a mother's love." I thought of all the dinners where she had compared me unfavorably to Sloane Donovan, the constant suggestions that Blake had married beneath him, the subtle and not-so-subtle digs at my supposed middle-class background. But seeing her now, broken and pleading, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not sympathy, certainly, but a kind of weary pity. "I can't help Blake," I said firmly. "He created this situation with his own choices. But I can ensure that your personal trust fund remains protected from the civil suits. The one your late husband set up. It's modest, but it will keep you comfortable." She sobbed harder, whether from relief or continued desperation, I couldn't tell. After she left, Grace found me standing at the window again, watching the sunset over the ocean. "That was more generous than she deserved," Grace observed. "She's a bitter, selfish woman who raised a son in her own image." "She is," I replied. "But she doesn't deserve to be homeless because Blake turned out to be exactly who she taught him to be." The final satisfaction came 2 weeks later, when I personally oversaw the renovations of the Vance Innovations executive floor. As the new owner, via Sterling Biopharma, I had full control over the space. Most of it was to become research labs, giving the scientists the resources they had always needed but never received under Blake. But his office, that corner suite where I'd overheard him call me naive, where I'd seen him with Sloane, that space deserved special treatment. I stood in the doorway as workers dismantled everything that had made it his sanctuary. The massive oak desk where Head plotted his exit strategy. The wall of awards and accolades that had fed his ego. The leather couch where he had betrayed our marriage in every way imaginable. "What should we do with this?" The foreman held up a framed photo that had been on Blake's desk. Our wedding photo, the one where we both looked deliriously happy, before the lies and the secrets and the betrayals. "Trash," I said without hesitation. "All of it, to the dumpster." I watched from the window as the workers heaved the couch over the edge and into the industrial dumpster below. It landed with a satisfying thud, the leather splitting, the frame shattering. 6 years of marriage, reduced to garbage in a metal bin, waiting to be hauled away and forgotten. The office was to become a supply closet, shelves of printer paper and toner cartridges, where Blake's ego once resided. Janitors would keep their mops and buckets where he had kept his secrets and lies. Every time someone needed office supplies, they would walk through the space where Blake Vance thought he was building an empire, not knowing he was standing on the ruins of a man who had confused cruelty with strength and deception with intelligence. As I was signing off on the final renovation orders, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. I almost deleted it, assuming it was another reporter, but something made me read it. "Miss Sterling, this is Dr. Evelyn Reed from the research team. Thank you for saving our jobs and our research. We won't let you down." The research team didn't know it yet, but under Sterling Biopharma's leadership, they were about to complete the breakthrough in gene therapy that Blake had promised but could never deliver. Their work would go on to save lives, make headlines for the right reasons, and prove that good science could survive bad leadership. Blake would get to watch it happen from a prison cell, while his former employees achieved everything he had only pretended to build. The message from Dr. Evelyn Reed stayed with me over the following months, a small reminder that something good could grow from the wreckage. 6 months passed in a blur of legal proceedings, corporate restructuring, and learning to live the life I had hidden for so long. The Hamptons estate went from being a museum I visited to a home, its 20 rooms gradually filling with actual life, not the echo of emptiness. The invitation to keynote the Global Pharmaceutical Innovation Summit came on a Tuesday morning, hand-delivered by a courier to ensure I couldn't pretend I hadn't received it. They wanted me to give the opening address, to stand before an auditorium of industry leaders and explain the new direction of Sterling Biopharma. The same podium where Blake had planned to announce the Vance Innovations breakthrough was now going to be mine. I stood in front of my bedroom mirror that morning, but this time, I was hiding nothing. The Cartier watch gleamed on my wrist. The designer suit I wore cost more than most people's monthly salary, and I no longer pretended otherwise. My reflection showed someone I was still learning to recognize, confident without being arrogant, powerful without being cruel, authentic in a way I had never allowed myself to be before. The convention center was buzzing with a familiar energy when I arrived. Many of the same faces from that night 6 months ago filled the auditorium, though their expressions had changed. Where they had once shown polite interest in Blake's promises, they now looked at me with genuine curiosity, and perhaps a little fear. They all knew the story of the naive wife who turned out to be a billionaire, who had destroyed her husband's empire only to build something better from its ashes. "Good morning," I began, my voice ringing out clear in the hall, with none of the tremor that used to accompany my public speaking. 6 months ago, many of you were here to witness what happens when ambition operates without ethics, when success is built on deception instead of true innovation. Today, I am here to show you what we have built in its place. The presentation laid out the transformation of Sterling Biopharma. Not just the acquisition of research, but a total restructuring of how pharmaceutical development could function. Profit sharing for every employee, from janitors to lead scientists. Anonymous ethics hotlines that actually led to action. Sharing certain research on an open-source basis to advance the field, not just our bottom line. We have proven that ethical business is not just morally right, I continued, clicking to a slide showing our latest breakthrough, the gene therapy Blake had promised but never delivered, now thriving in clinical trials. It is also more profitable. Our researchers are more innovative when they are not afraid. Our alliances are stronger when they are built on transparency. Our innovations are more meaningful when they are designed to help people, not just generate revenue. Grace stood at the side of the stage, now my chief operating officer, wearing a power suit that probably cost more than she had made in a year at her previous job. She had earned every penny of her new salary, helping me transform Sterling from my father's traditional pharmaceutical company into something revolutionary. When I introduced her, the applause was genuine. Everyone in the industry knew her story, the loyal friend who had stood by me when anyone else would have run, who had helped me pack my grandmother's porcelain as my world was collapsing, who had drunk champagne from paper cups in a $10 million mansion as we figured out how to rebuild. The questions after the speech were pointed but respectful. How had I hidden my identity for so long? What made me finally reveal the truth? Did I have any regrets about the way it happened? I answered honestly, admitting that living a double life had been exhausting, that love had made me do foolish things, and that sometimes the truth needs a dramatic unveiling to be believed. 3 hours later, I was walking to my car when I saw him. Blake was standing outside the district courthouse, 2 blocks away, his lawyer at his side, both in dark suits that couldn't hide the defeat in their postures. The sentencing had happened that morning. I had known about it but had chosen not to attend. Seeing him now was like seeing a ghost of someone who was once important but had become irrelevant. He saw me at the same moment and froze. He had just been sentenced to 5 years in federal prison. The judge, apparently unmoved by his lawyer's arguments about being a first-time offender and his prior good standing, had thrown the book at him. He would serve at least 3 before being eligible for parole. His lawyer tried to pull him away, but Blake shook him off and started toward me, walking with the determined stride of someone with nothing left to lose. "Claire," he said when he was close enough for me to see the lines around his eyes, the flecks of gray in his hair that hadn't been there 6 months ago. I waited, saying nothing, giving him no encouragement or acknowledgement beyond holding his gaze. "I just wanted to say—" He stopped, searching for words that might matter. "That you ruined everything." I didn't react. "No, Blake. I revealed everything. There's a significant difference. You planned this, all of it, hiding who you were, waiting for the perfect moment to humiliate me." I almost laughed at his narcissism, still intact despite everything. "You are still trying to make yourself the victim in this story. I hid who I was because I wanted to be loved for myself. You hid who you were because you were planning to rob me blind. We are not the same." He took a step closer, and I saw his lawyer tense, probably worried about violating some court order. "You were so naive," he said, repeating the words that had started it all. "You actually believed in love." "You were right about one thing," I said, my voice as hard as granite. "I was naive. But naivete can be cured by experience. What you have: selfishness, cruelty, a complete inability to value anything outside of yourself that's terminal." His face flushed, but before he could reply, his lawyer grabbed his arm and forcefully pulled him away. I watched them go, feeling nothing but a vague sense of closure. Blake would spend the next few years in prison and then emerge to find an industry that had moved on without him, where his name was synonymous with scandal, not success. That night, I sat in my father's study as the sunset painted the ocean in shades of amber and gold. In my hands, I held the letter he had left with his estate documents, the one I had read 100 times but only now truly understood. "My dearest Claire," it began in his precise script. "If you are reading this, it means you have finally claimed your legacy. Not the money that is just numbers and accounts, but the responsibility that comes with it. I kept it from you not because I didn't trust you, but because I wanted you to discover who you are without its weight. True wealth is not what you inherit. It is who you become when you are tested. Money can be lost, stolen, or squandered, but the person you forge through trial and triumph, that is yours forever. I have faith you will become someone remarkable. All my love, Dad." The letter trembled slightly in my hands as tears I hadn't expected blurred the words. Outside the window, the ocean stretched on, endless, and somewhere beyond the horizon, the future was waiting. Not the future I had planned with Blake, built on lies and hidden identities, but something real, solid, and entirely my own. Tomorrow, the research team was presenting their latest findings. Next week, we were announcing 3 new partnerships with companies that shared our values. Next month, the first patients would receive the gene therapy that could save their lives. The empire I had inherited had become something bigger than my father had ever imagined. Not just profitable, but purposeful. Some women inherit fortunes and spend them. Others inherit fortunes and hide them. I had done both, and learned that neither brought happiness. The real satisfaction came from using that fortune to build something meaningful, surrounded by people who valued loyalty over lineage and truth over appearances.